Hello ladies and gents. I wanted to today talk a little bit about what the changes to Planetside are going to mean for your gameplay. How are things going to be affected? I think there's a few changes that are going to be put into the game that are disproportionately going to affect you. For example, I think the changes to Nanoweave being basically removed, at least functionally, is going to mean that a lot more people are going to be running Resist, and they're also going to be running Adrenaline or the Nanite Mesh ability option. So the real question at that point becomes what's best, and also is Medic going to be considered better? And I want to make an argument for that as well, because I think there's some validity to the idea that now maybe Medic with say Carapace and maybe even Symbiote may be better than a heavy assault in a 1v1 engagement. And I also wanted to kind of compare Resist Shield to the Adrenaline and the Nano Mesh option. So the question really is which one's better, and I'm going to argue that Nano Mesh and Adrenaline are going to be better than Resist for the most part in 1v1 engagements. That's because Resist is only going to happen to turn on when on the other person's screen it's turned on, and so any incoming damage is only going to be applied to Resist when they see Resist being on. And that means all of the delay time isn't going to count as Resist being on for the opposition shooting at you. And so maybe on your screen Resist has just been turned on and technically the incoming damage should have Resist being applied. But because on the other person's screen Resist may not be on yet because of the delay, for them it's not going to count. And so you're effectively, anytime you're getting initiated on, not going to have part of Resist being counted. And that's exactly why I will probably still be running around with Adrenaline and Nanite Mesh Generator over Resist. Now there is some argument to be made for Resist as well, and it comes in a few different forms. The main argument for Resist right now, instead of the Adrenaline or the Nanite Mesh Generator options, are simply that with Resist, if you get revived, you then again have full shields essentially. And if you die a third time, you still have full shields essentially. Whereas if you die with a normal adrenaline shield and you've already used it, you may then get back up with say 5 or 10% of your shield back. And so in those kind of point holdy situations, you can make an argument that Resist is better, and I would generally agree with that. Now, as I believe mentioned earlier, you can survive a lot of the time an extra bullet when you have Resist instead of an Adrenaline or a Nanite Mesh Generator. But I really don't buy this argument fully, but I did want to kind of add it in just as a pro of Resist in theory. Oh, there's also another negative of Resist that I didn't mention. When you have Adrenaline or you have the Nanite Mesh options, once your shields are depleted, you then have normal movement speed again, which means that your strafing speed is going to be slightly higher, and it also means you can sprint away from the opposition faster. However, when you have Resist, you're always going to have that slower speed associated with your character, and that really, in my opinion, cripples Resist being meta outside of those point hold situations where you're getting revived several times. And so really, to give you a little bit of an extra picture here, you're shooting at an enemy, you run out of ammo, or you see multiple enemies coming across, whatever it's going to be, and you decide you need to disengage from the opposition that's shooting at you. With Adrenaline, you may use that Adrenaline just to give you a bit of extra health. Maybe you're jumping and you're using a medkit at the same time so that you don't even lose movement penalty when you're trying to get away from the enemy. But then with Resist, you do the same thing and you're trying to run away with from the opposition, and with Resist you have a movement penalty associated with it for the entire time that you're running away, because you can't turn it off or else you lose the resistance. The other problem that Resist has is that when you're peeking around corners, say a door frame that you're peeking around, with Resist you're going to be slower. Whereas with Adrenaline or with Nanite Mesh, you can kind of slowly peek the corner whilst having Adrenaline ready to turn on when you need it, while still having a good aim down sight movement speed. But if with Resist you have to have it on whilst you're peeking, and again whilst you're aiming down the sights and trying to find the enemy as you're peeking a doorway, you are going to be slower. Now I think I may have argued in the past that Resist also does apply to heads, so technically that does give it some extra viability, but Overshield does as well. And so really, now that Nanoweave's been removed, I don't really consider that a viable argument to consider. And so in conclusion, really I recommend Adrenaline or I recommend Nanomesh Generator, but however, there's a massive but here. I would make the argument that Medic is perhaps a little bit better now than Heavy Assault in situational areas. For example, you have the H345 or the TR and NC alternatives, which are technically slightly better, and they have better DPS in theory than the LMGs like the Orion, MSWR, and maybe the Anchor. Now they may have a really small clip size, but I did want to mention that as the fast little tidbit that maybe Medic is better than Heavy now in some situations. I then want us to also combine this Medic class that we're kind of building in our heads here with not only the H345 or the TR and NC alternatives, but also we add in Carapace. With Carapace, the second we start taking damage, we can start healing ourselves. And so even though on paper we have 1000 HP, realistically by the time we get killed, we have 1050, we have 1200, depending on how quickly we get blasted down. Now on top of that, we could also, now because of the bug being fixed surrounding Symbiote and a significant buff to Symbiote, argue that because Symbiote essentially gives you a free extra 125 HP, Symbiote now arguably could be considered very viable, and actually may even be ran on Heavy Assault, I very much suspect. But regardless of that fact, I think that that extra little nuance there of having essentially 125 extra HP for you because of Symbiote, and you can start healing that back straight away with a Medic class with Carapace and Symbiote, you may have about the same effective HP and technically a higher DPS gun than Heavy Assault. And so we could start making an argument there that Medic's now really strong in the game. The real advantage of Heavy Assault right now is the uptime that you can have with an LMG relative to with a Medic. You know, you got a 30 clip size gun. And so with that 30 clip size gun, you don't have as much sustain in order to keep mowing down several enemies in a row. And so you do have to take time to reload. And that reload time does really hurt your KPM if you know there's only 3 or 4 targets there to shoot at. And so with that, say for example Betelgeuse or the Saw or the Butcher, you might be able to chain kill up for 5 kills if you want to without any problem. But then we have a look at the H345 with Medic, you might be able to chain kill 2 kills, maybe 3, and maybe 2 or 3 more with a pistol. And that's all you're going to be able to do before you have to take some time to reload your guns. And so the kind of Zarg Safi, or whatever you want to call it, high KPM meta surrounding LMGs will still exist because of the higher clip size of those guns. But for pure 1v1 engagements, I would make an argument that now Medic may be considered as good as Heavy Assault because of the Symbiote and perhaps the Carapace combination. Not entirely sure how that's going to work out, but if it does work, it would be big. I do also want to make it clear, when you're running around with Carapace, normally you would run around with Combat Sergeant as well, so that as you get kills, you can keep up your heals. But in theory, instead of running Combat Sergeant, you can run around with medkits in combination with your Carapace and heal yourself back that way. And it does technically work. As long as you have membership, you technically can sustain that nanite ban. Although I will say it does leave you with having to redeploy to a beacon in order to replenish your medkits occasionally if you do go on these long, 10 kill streak sessions. And so it really depends what skill level you are at as to if that's a viable way to play. If you are chain killing, at least say 5 or 6 people, using a Carapace with Medic with medkits might not really be that viable of an option, again because you are eventually going to run out of medkits. I will also say that for that Medic and Symbiote combination, or technically I mean if you want to, you can also run around with Carapace and Combat Sergeant as I mentioned. With that combo, if you have medkits as well, you can engage the enemy, kill one guy or maybe make him low, and then whilst he thinks that you're waiting for shields, you can quickly medkit, then get back in the fight 3 or 4 seconds early, which they may not expect, and then they may be at a massive disadvantage because they're fighting on say 600 HP, they're trying to get their shields up, and you're going in on full health because you used a medkit. And so that's kind of where my mindset is right now, around the kind of like Zarg Safi and also the 1v1 scenarios in which you can play the game. And again, I'm not giving those negative connotations. I know some people think of Zarg Safi behavior as negative stuff. I'm not going to go into that, it's not really something I think. And I would love to hear if there's something that I've got wrong or some extra nuance that you would add in as to where you think the specific meta is for Planetside with the changes to the game. Is it really that Heavy Assault's still meta with a Adrenaline shield, or is it that it's resist? And likewise, is perhaps a Carapace medic now considered a viable option, even more so than before, because of Nanoweave getting removed? Also, technically, you can run directive scout rifles with a medic as well. So you could, for example, have a Vandal on your back, and that does have some utility there instead of a pistol if you wanted to have some more uptime. And so I did want to add that little bit of extra mention in there. Anyway, until next time, have a great day. I'm out. GG.